Good afternoon. We're going to talk a little bit about advanced music theory. This is an introduction video to just kind of peruse advanced music theory so you have an idea what we might be talking about in the coming videos. One of the first things to get through your head with advanced music theory is that anything that can be done in music, it can be a conceptual theory. Does that make sense? It can be a progression, it can be a structure, it can be a change, it can be a modulation, it can be, anything that you decide that you just pick up the guitar and just start making noise on it, and that could be a conceptual theory if you decided that you liked it. Does that make sense? All of a sudden it's, you can break it down into a theory or a construct and what you're doing with advanced theory. And that concept can be very simple to understand, but it can be a very complicated concept because of the complexities involved in that. The first thing that you want to understand is that if you went back and watched the videos on this channel about basic music theory, that I made those videos for my audio engineering channel so that people could relate the basic music concepts and constructs and the complexities that can be built from them and relate them to audio engineering as far as music production is concerned, because it's very important, the frequencies, the frequency content, how it's built with intervals, and all the things that are involved in the frequency realm when you're dealing with any audio engineering or sound sculpting or sound in general in the studio, that those concepts relate directly to that. Directly. And so those videos were made for that, but they are going to give you the same knowledge on this channel about music theory so that you can apply this to your actual musical constructs, interpreting music or building music, composing, things like that, deconstructing other pieces of work. I sat and watched a video the other night about these people deconstructing this short melody line from Beethoven. I think it was Beethoven. And I watched this video for 2 hours. These guys taking this melody line and deconstructing it and trying to come up with all these theoretical ideas of what it was, how he came to that understanding. It was out there, bro. And I was like, it was a little bit too much time for me to be spending on something like that, because they were really trying to get inside of his head what was going on. But they were doing it with theoretical knowledge and trying to apply theory and advanced theory concepts to what he might have been doing. And so that can be very complicated. So basically, I've made a couple notes here. A lot of times I don't do that, but for this series that, I wanted to touch on a couple things. And I'm probably going to touch on more things than I made notes here about. But, one of the first thing is, none of this stuff is necessary in any order. These are all concepts and topics we'll address, and probably many more, to help you to work through music theory. Music theory, even advanced theory, is very simple to me, because one day I woke up, I had been studying music theory for, I don't know, must have been 5-6 years. And one morning I woke up and I was practicing all kinds of stuff. And I said, wait a minute. What don't I understand about this? What concepts do I not understand? Well, I came to understanding that I understood it. And one morning I just woke up and I went, bam, I got it. And it was like, there's all kinds of things. What's consonant and dissonant in the Baroque period, in some time in history. That's something totally different. These are concepts. If you want to study music theory and musical productions, compositions, things like that, to try to deconstruct them, to understand, you can spend the whole rest of your life doing that instead of composing, which, I'm not saying to not do that, but you can get lost in that the rest of your life. I've seen people to where they'll have, like a chalkboard on their wall, and been around them talking to them, and it'll look like Albert Einstein is trying to just deconstruct this symphony, and I'll just be looking at it going, in my laboratory, I had to get into some of this kind of stuff like you see on my doc's lab to understand, the fast forward transform, what was going on, and then all these other concepts that were happening in audio engineering to work with music production. So I had to get into some of the math. In music, that I found that I really didn't, unless I was really trying to do something that really didn't work out to music to me. Does that make sense? And, deconstructing to the point to where it became some mathematical formula, it got to the point to where that wasn't something that I felt was constructive to me. Okay, now you may change your mind later on. You'll give me a call and show me your chalkboard, and I'll be like, wow, bro, that's incredible. How do you understand that, that's cool, bro. But so basically some of the things we want to talk about is, building the larger complexities from the simple concepts. That I relate that to everything I teach. Trying to break everything down to the simpler concepts as you can to build larger complexities. So we'll be discussing that at length. Using those simple concepts to create, compose, and deconstruct other music. That can be very important. You get going along and you listen to the song and you want to deconstruct what was going on. The progression, the chord progression, the harmonies of the lead, the counterpoint of the music, things that were happening there, being able to deconstruct what was happening is a very useful tool to help you grow in your compositions and or teaching and or whatever else you're doing in music. It's very helpful and important a lot of times. When I started out just by ear. I'd listen to something and I'd mess around half the day trying to figure out what it was before I really dawned on me, and this is when I was real young, But it's an important concept to be able to do. The other thing is scales. In Western music that we mostly be discussing, it's the scales. Basically, you've got the major and the relative minor scale. Then you've got a bunch of other scales that, the major scale is seven notes of the 12 chromatic tones that are used for the major scale. And like the harmonic scale and the melodic scale are the same, different notes for those scales. And understanding those different scales and what notes are different to be able to use them or change to them, modulate to them, and things like that. I mean, that's an advanced theory, being able to use them together. And, and chords also. Chords for, for a movement in work, if you're playing in a D major, but you use some chord that has a non-harmonic tone in it to help the movement of the piece. They'll call that a borrowed chord or something like that. And, those are very important concepts to understand. And once you get a grip on them and you understand the simplicity of what that is, that you spend a lot less time trying to, that it doesn't roll around in your head so much that it's some kind of mathematical thing that you automatically understand. That chord isn't in key, or that scale, they've just left the key. They used a borrowed note or a borrowed chord that's not in the key, or they've modulated, or they've changed key. Does that make sense? So those are concepts we'll be definitely looking at. Modulation is a huge one for movement. Changing from one key to another, or climbing, climbing using some kind of stair up or down, that you're using a series of notes to climb to another key, or even another note that's in, or a chord that's in the progression, and maybe using non-tonal notes to help the movement of the composition. Or understanding what somebody else was doing in one of their other compositions, so it doesn't look like Greek to you. You're trying to read it, and you're looking at this thing, you're going, well, he used these other notes, and now he was in like F, and now what is that? Because he borrowed a note to help the movement of the composition. And he was playing out of key, and he might be changing key, modulating. He might just, who knows where he might be going. If it sounded good and it was consonant to him, when I say consonant or dissonant, normally that means, depending on what time period you're talking about or who you're talking to, that means that that chord or that note would be acceptable as sounding good with that music. And that's all in the ear of the beholder. I mean, to me, tasteful is tasteful. If it's not tasteful, I really don't like it. But, time period doesn't really matter much to me, because if it sounded like crap to me, it sounded like crap, and I don't care who wrote it. Does that make sense? Well, I mean, but that's the understanding of consonant or dissonant, accepted or not accepted, as something that's tasteful in that composition. So that's another concept we're dealing with. I'm using non-tonal notes and chords, borrowed chords. Those concepts are huge to understand, these other scales and the chords that go with them. You know, that's another thing, you know, playing in key. You're playing, you know, in a harmonic, you know, minor, and what chords can you play in that key to be playing in key? That's a huge thing to understand. Or being able to figure out, you know, fairly rapidly if that's in key or not, or if they've used a borrowed chord and why, to see what they're doing. You know, simple concepts like a chord. I'm playing an F chord, and I can use any one of those notes to step from. That means if I'm going to change to the next chord, any one of those notes that are in that chord, I can use to as a jumping point to the next chord. Does that make sense? Meaning that note, and I'm choosing that note to the note that's going to change, and then I'm going to build after that note changes to another chord around that. That's a huge concept to understand. It took me, I stumbled upon that one day and nobody ever taught me that. And then I was like, wow, I can just use any one of these notes and start changing that note to something else. And then, you know, and then build from that. And that was a cool, I mean, that helped my composition a lot. So those are concepts we'll discuss. Harmonies are a huge thing, you know, harmonies are so huge. So we'll do a lot of discussion of harmonies, you know, and also using different instruments for texturing and, you know, in the production, you know, a different instrument can be huge, and into adding a different texture or a combination of different instruments adding some texture. You might not know that right away until you happen upon a bassoon and this French horn. You're going, wow, dude, that sounds so cool, you know, and it's like, that's really neat, dude. For composition, it's got this really cool sound, you know, and it's like, it doesn't sound like either one of them. It sounds like this totally other instrument. You know, when you start doing some harmonies with them or something, that's another huge concept that we'll talk about. Possibilities for progressions of notes. I've got, you know, that's in chord progressions. I'll show you something just really quick that I don't want to take up too much time just sitting here doing this, but I went through and I sat down. I don't know if you can see this very well, but let me see if I can find it. I had gone through and figured out every progression you could do with notes, in the major keys, minor keys, and every scale. If you look at this, you would have no idea how long I spent on this. And I figured out mathematically exactly how many different chord progressions you could do from starting on any note in any scale, or any type of a riff, a lead riff. How many different combinations are possible? I mapped it all out. And one day I figured out after I got done, I was like, what am I really going to use that for? I mean, am I really going to go through it? Sometimes it's cool. I'll pull it out and just mess around. I think that sounds cool. But, you know, I got lost in it, bro. I really did. I mean, it wasn't that I got lost, but I mean, I got a little off track, you know. I mean, I asked somebody one time about that, and they're like, why are you doing that? You know, I was like, well, because I want to know, you know, what does that do? And I want to know for sure how many different ways to do that. And, you know, I went off on that, a lot of things like that, trying to understand advanced theory. So that's another thing we will discuss and talk about. Different ways to voice, articulate notes, staccato, legato, taps. I mean, different ways that you can articulate music is another advanced theoretical concept. Any kind of different way that you can voice an instrument, that's advanced theory, because you can use that somewhere in some type of application. Somewhere along the line, if you make notes of it, or you understand it, or somebody else's, you know, somebody else's articulations and how to make that work, that is a tool in advanced, you know, theory, you know, for composition. So, and deconstructing other people's music. So that's another huge thing we'll talk about. So, you know, things like breaks and stops, quiet places, loud places, dynamics, pauses, build ups and build downs. All those kind of concepts are huge as far as theory for constructing. You know, if you're just listening to some pop song or something that's, you know, something that's really basic, it might not sink in that much. But it really is a huge those concepts are huge, you know, to building. The better you are, the more familiar you are with them, when you're working with music, that the more apt it is to pop up in your head and go, wow, I could do that. You know, I mean, that would be really cool at this point. I'm kind of stuck right here and I'm going, well, what could I do there? Well, that would be really cool. That type of articulation with that instrument and that combination of those instruments with that, you know, with that break and that pause, right? You know, does that make sense? All those things are very advanced theory, and some of them may not seem like advanced theory, but they are. Things like, and we'll also get into strange brew. Okay, when I say strange brew, I'm not going to call anybody weird, okay? But strange brew to me is like, you know, really advanced fusion, experimental music, really advanced jazz. Some of it's, in my mind, ridiculous. I'll listen and I'll go, dude, that doesn't. I was listening to this guy, Alan Holdsworth, his guitarist, phenomenal guitarist. I was listening to this composition he done, and it sounded really great. And then he got to one part of it, and it sounded, to me, it sounded like crap. You know, it just sounded like he was wandering around all over the place. And I was like, that doesn't even sound like music anymore, bro. Is that a mathematical concept you put together, or what? You know, I was like, I mean, he was doing it quite well. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He was articulating it quite well, but it sounded like garbage to me. You know, it did not sound like music, but it's some fusions, some advanced experimental music, some real experimental jazz or heavy jazz can get like that way. And you just be going, that doesn't even sound like music, bro. You know, but it's the advanced theory can be a huge role in that. And if you watch some of these musicians and you're thinking, well, it sounds like crap, but you're watching them in the band and they're just tight. Bam, 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 bam. You know, and you're thinking to yourself, why didn't they spend all this time doing that? Well, I'm not really sure what got them into it, but I mean, it's theoretically and mathematically on, you know, just on. And their timing is phenomenal. Their changes that they've worked out, you know, I mean, it can be unbelievable. But, I mean, if you're not into it, you're not into it. Understanding some of the concepts, what they might be doing, that's very good information to have. So those are some of the concepts that I want to talk about. And in this series, we're going to discuss a whole lot of different concepts. The basic thing that I want to get through your head is advanced musical theory. One of the things about advanced musical theory, I'll tell you a story about a guy named Johnny Baines. Now, Johnny Baines, you might even watch the video, that he wanted to play like Joe Satriani and all this other stuff. And I was like, I'll teach you this stuff, bro. And then one day he came over, we're talking, and he liked like gospel and blues. And I was like, well, bro, I don't think that you need to spend all these, because I'd be pounding him all the time, bro, practice all the time, now, you right? You know, and I was like, and we finally came to understanding he doesn't need to be spending that much time for what he's trying to do. He was not trying to become that type of a player. And the stuff that he was working on, he needed to focus on different things. That super advanced theory was not going to be something applicable probably to what he was trying to accomplish. So, you know, I hope that you're okay with me using your name, Johnny, but anyway, that concept, you figure out where that that theory is trying to take you, and knowing when to go, that's enough. I want to play this type of music. I'm going to play like Willie Nelson. I don't need to study music theory for the next 30 years, bro. I mean, I just don't, you know, with all due respect to Willie Nelson, that, you know, I mean, he's put out a lot of music and he's got a lot of fans, but I would not suggest you studying music theory for the next 10 years, advanced music theory, to try to play some Willie Nelson tunes or write some Willie Nelson tunes. Does that make sense? And that's with all due respect to everybody involved in music. You have to know, you have to get an idea of where you're at. And how you get an idea where you're at is to ask somebody. You know, ask somebody that has some understanding of musical concepts. Once you understand the basic music theory, before you get too in depth into the, you know, advanced theory, that you get an understanding of where you're headed. And you can ask somebody that has some knowledge about it, where you should focus on before you get lost in it. I did it because I love the knowledge and I love the study, and I wanted to understand it completely so I could write Willie Nelson songs or Bach and Beethoven and Paganini, extreme jazz or experimental music, so that I could say, yeah, dude, I can understand that and I can go there. You know, because that was very important to me. Music was that important to me that it was something I really wanted to do. So, you know, you have to keep that in mind. So as we go through this series, we're going to try to address a whole lot of issues to get you where you need to be. And you can always go back and reference any of those videos if you feel like furthering your knowledge. If you're playing music, I suggest you watch all of them so that you at least heard of it. You've had, you know, you have an impression of it and you've experienced some of it and viewed it. So welcome to the series. Peace, hope, love. Hope you enjoy them.